The rain fell steadily against Clara's apartment windows, tapping a quiet rhythm that matched the soft thrum of her thoughts as she sank into her favorite chair with a steaming cup of tea, her mind wandering between the memories of the day and the quiet hum of the city outside, the streetlights reflecting off puddles and painting long, golden streaks across the wet pavement, giving the room a warm, comforting glow that seemed to contrast with the chill in the air, and for a moment, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks, a brief pause in the constant rush of responsibilities and the lingering feeling of being slightly adrift, until a soft, hesitant knock at the door shattered the fragile calm like a pebble thrown into still water, echoing through the apartment in a way that made her heart catch, not from fear but from that sudden, inexplicable awareness that something unusual was about to happen, something that would disturb the quiet order of her evening and pull her attention completely into the doorway where a figure now lingered, hesitant, unsure, and unlike the usual visitors she might expect at this hour, there was a tension in the air, a weight that made the familiar walls of her apartment feel smaller, almost claustrophobic, and Clara rose slowly, the cup in her hands forgotten as her mind raced through possibilities, expecting perhaps a neighbor needing help, a delivery that had been delayed, or some urgent message, yet nothing could prepare her for the sight that met her eyes as she opened the door, her nephew, Leo, standing there with rain-soaked hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from the hem of his coat onto the welcome mat, and eyes that refused to meet hers, fixed instead on the floor as if the weight of something unsaid was pinning him in place, a nervous energy radiating from him in the slight trembling of his hands and the shallow, uneven breath he drew, and in that instant, Clara's heart clenched, recognizing the familiar patterns of worry, guilt, or shame that sometimes visit young hearts when words are too heavy to speak, yet she also sensed something else, a hint of urgency, a fragile courage fighting against fear, because even in his silence, there was a pull, a quiet insistence that something had to be said, something important, and the storm outside seemed to pause for a heartbeat in response to the charged tension in the small foyer as Clara stepped aside, her hand lightly brushing the doorframe as she invited him in, yet he remained rooted, the hesitation clear, the long pause stretching in a way that made her stomach tighten, and when she spoke his name softly, Leo? It floated in the air, almost a question to the universe, almost a plea for an explanation, a lifeline to the nephew she had watched grow from a mischievous child into a thoughtful young man, someone whose heart she knew to be deep and sensitive, and his silence answered nothing, leaving a quiet dread to coil in her chest as she motioned again for him to enter, only to find that he moved reluctantly, taking a small step forward, then stopping, glancing briefly at the empty chairs, the familiar clutter of her living room, as if unsure of where to place himself, as if the room itself had transformed into something unfamiliar, something that demanded honesty and courage she wasn't sure he was ready to summon, and in that moment, Clara felt the weight of anticipation pressing on her, the kind of waiting that stretches seconds into eternities, the kind that leaves a soft, humming ache in the chest because you know something is about to change everything, and when Leo finally spoke, his voice low, uneven, barely audible over the soft drumming of the rain, it was as though the words themselves were a struggle, each syllable wrestled from his lips with careful effort. I need to tell you something, Aunt Clara, something I should have said a long time ago, and those words, tentative and trembling, struck Clara with an unexpected force, because in them she sensed the culmination of hidden nights, private thoughts, and emotions too complex and deep for easy expression, and her mind began to race, questioning what it could be, imagining stories that ranged from the mundane to the dramatic, yet knowing instinctively that whatever it was significant, personal, and heartfelt, a moment that demanded presence and patience, a delicate unfolding that could not be rushed, for she had learned in her years that the truth of the heart never arrives in haste, it comes quietly, hesitantly, like a fragile bird testing the air before taking flight, and Clara felt her own heart mirror that careful hesitation, waiting to receive whatever revelation Leo had struggled to carry, and as she gestured gently for him to step inside, she noticed the subtle signs of inner turmoil, the slight slump of his shoulders, the restless shifting of his weight, the way his fingers twisted together nervously, all of which painted a portrait of someone standing on the edge of confession, teetering between retreat and the courage to speak the truth, and though Clara wanted to ease the tension with words, to offer comfort and reassurance, she also understood that some moments required quiet witness, The silent support of a loved one who simply allowed space for expression, who could hold the room steady while emotions collided and truths emerged, and so she remained quiet, her eyes gentle, her posture open, her hands ready but still, offering nothing more than presence and understanding, the kind of support that gives permission for vulnerability without judgment. And Leo shifted again, finally stepping past the threshold, the door closing softly behind him with a sound that sealed the intimacy of the moment. The apartment now a small universe in which only the two of them existed, the rain outside a distant, rhythmic hum as though providing a private soundtrack for the confession to come, and as he hung his wet coat, the droplets splattering lightly on the floor. He looked around as if trying to find the right words in the familiar surroundings, seeking safety in familiarity even as the storm of emotion raged quietly within, and Clara, sensing the gravity of the moment, poured 2 cups of tea, the steam curling upward, a warm, fragrant mist that filled the space between them with comfort, and yet nothing could dissolve the tension entirely, because the words he carried were heavy, weighted with longing, regret, perhaps fear, and hope, all tangled together in a knot that only speaking could unravel. And when he finally lifted his gaze, the nervous energy in his frame slowly giving way to a fragile bravery, Clara caught a glimpse of something profound, an honesty so raw that it seemed to hang in the air like fragile glass, catching the light in the soft glow of the lamps, beautiful and delicate and terrifying all at once. And for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken understanding passing between them, and Clara realized that whatever came next, it would change something deep within both of them, for this was not a casual visit, not a passing conversation, but a turning point, a quiet, emotional pivot that demanded attention and care, a gentle unfolding of feelings that had been buried, postponed, and feared for too long, and she felt the responsibility of witness, of being present without interfering, of holding the space for truth to emerge in its own time. And as Leo drew a slow, trembling breath and whispered again, "I've carried this for so long. I needed to say it," Clara knew that this was the moment when the quiet life of the evening would be irrevocably altered, when the rhythm of rain and tea and dim lights would give way to a story that was both painful and beautiful, honest and raw, yet safe in its vulnerability. And she held her breath, allowing the space between them to stretch, charged with anticipation, the storm outside fading into a background murmur, while inside, in the warmth and quiet of the apartment, 2 hearts prepared to open, one hesitant, one steady, ready to receive, and the entire room seemed suspended in time, waiting for the first word, the first confession, the first step toward change that would ripple through the quiet lives they had lived so far, until finally, in that fragile pause, the first thread of revelation began to unravel, a delicate, trembling step into honesty that promised to reshape the evening, the bond between them, and perhaps even the hearts of all involved, because some truths, once spoken, have the power to linger, echoing softly long after the first syllable leaves the lips, carrying warmth, pain, and the bittersweet promise of something new. And Clara watched Leo, sensing every heartbeat, every pause, every flicker of emotion in his eyes, knowing that whatever he said next would be a story she would carry with her, a story of courage, longing, and the quiet beauty of finally letting oneself be seen. And the soft click of the door closing, the faint hiss of the kettle, and the gentle drip of rain created a rhythm that matched the unspoken promise between them, that tonight, everything might change. Leo sat on the edge of the couch, his hands gripping the steaming cup of tea Clara had poured, the warmth seeping into his palms but failing to reach the nervous tremor that ran through his entire body. And for a moment, he just stared at the swirling liquid, watching the steam curl upward like soft ghosts of thoughts he had carried for far too long, memories that clung to him like shadows, memories of Emily, her laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the quiet moments they had shared as children, the stolen glances in the schoolyard, the long talks on summer evenings, and all the times he had tried to confess, only to choke on words or let timing slip away, leaving the feelings buried under excuses, under fear, under pride. And now, years later, those same emotions had returned with a force that made his chest ache and his mind spin, and Clara watched him silently, sensing the storm behind his eyes, understanding the weight of unspoken emotions, the kind that made a person feel both alive and trapped. And she waited patiently, knowing that forcing words would only break the fragile courage he was mustering. The courage that had taken years to gather for this single, quiet confession, and finally, Leo looked up, his gaze hesitant but resolute, meeting hers with a vulnerability that made her heart squeeze and her breath catch, and in that gaze, Clara saw the reflection of longing, of love unspoken, of regrets that were both painful and beautiful, and she reached across the small table, placing her hand lightly on his, a gesture of reassurance, a bridge across the chasm of fear that separated them from honesty, and it was enough to make him take a deep breath, steadying himself, feeling the warmth of her support anchor him as he began to speak, his voice low, almost trembling. "It's about Emily," he said, and the name hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament, catching the light, delicate and precious, a name loaded with memory, with desire, with the ache of what had been left unsaid, and Clara nodded slowly, encouraging him without interrupting, letting him carry the burden of words that had been silent for too long, and he continued, I've tried to forget. I thought I could. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was fine, but every time I see her, every time I hear her laugh, I feel it again, the way my heart feels for her, the way it always has," and he paused, swallowing hard, the muscles in his jaw tight, the tension in his shoulders visible even as he fought to stay composed, and Clara's heart ached for him, knowing that love could be both tender and terrifying, a source of joy and pain at once, and she offered a small smile, soft and understanding, letting him know that whatever came next, she was there, a quiet witness to his truth, a steady presence in a room suddenly filled with uncertainty and raw emotion, and Leo's hands tightened around the cup as if holding on to courage itself. "I never told her how I felt when I should have. I never said the words because I was afraid of ruining everything, afraid she wouldn't feel the same, afraid I would lose her as a friend, and now I feel like time has slipped through my fingers and I don't know if it's too late," and the honesty in his voice, the rawness of the confession, made Clara's chest ache because she knew that fear of rejection could paralyze a person, could hold them hostage in their own heart, and yet there was bravery here too, a delicate, trembling bravery that had taken years to arrive, and she wanted to tell him that courage mattered more than timing, that the heart doesn't measure life in years but in moments of honesty, in seconds when you finally dare to speak, in the spaces where vulnerability meets love, and she leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "Leo, feelings aren't wrong. Wanting someone, caring for someone deeply, that's not a flaw, and it's never too late to tell the truth," and his eyes met hers fully now, searching, uncertain, but a spark of hope flickered in their depths, because for the first time, he felt seen, really seen, without judgment, without ridicule, without pressure, just presence, the kind of presence that allows hearts to open even when hands tremble and voices shake, and he drew another slow breath, the words forming carefully in his mind, each one a step across a bridge that had felt impossible to cross. I tried to write letters, to call, to tell her, but every time I start, I freeze. I can't seem to find the courage until now," and Clara felt the weight of years in those words, years of quiet longing, missed opportunities, and private heartache, and she reached out again, placing her other hand over his, letting him feel steady ground beneath the shaky tremors of emotion, and the warmth of human connection, of understanding, flowed gently between them, a quiet current of comfort and encouragement, and Leo's gaze softened, the tension in his body easing slightly as if the act of speaking itself released some of the weight he had carried alone, and the room, once filled with the soft sounds of rain and distant city hum, now seemed to pulse with the quiet intensity of confession. The small apartment transformed into a sanctuary of honesty, where fear could meet courage and longing could meet compassion, and Clara sensed that what Leo was sharing went beyond simple affection, that it was about the recognition of deep, enduring emotions, the kind that shape choices, that linger in quiet moments, that haunt dreams and memories, that create both heartache and hope, and she remained still, letting him speak, letting him unravel the tangle of feelings, letting the words flow in their own time, because she understood that this moment, fragile and significant, could not be rushed, could not be interrupted by well-meaning advice or hasty reassurances, and finally, Leo's voice lowered further, almost breaking. "I'm scared, Clara. I'm scared she doesn't feel the same. I'm scared that I've waited too long, that I missed my chance, and that everything we had, everything that mattered, it's too late now," and Clara felt a sharp pang of empathy, knowing too well the terror of waiting too long, of fearing that love might slip away. Yet she also knew that the act of speaking, of naming what has been silent, could shift everything, could create space for possibility even in the face of fear, and she squeezed his hands lightly, her voice soft but firm. The fact that you're telling me now, the fact that you're honest, that's the first step, Leo. That's courage. That matters more than anything else. And he exhaled slowly, almost a shudder, the tension in his frame melting slightly as if her words gave him permission to hope, to believe that honesty alone could create a path forward. And he looked at her then with eyes that held both vulnerability and the faintest glimmer of excitement, a mixture of terror and anticipation. Because once words are spoken, once the heart is revealed, there is no going back, only moving forward into what might come, and Clara felt the weight of the moment herself, understanding that the room held something sacred, something rare, a glimpse into a young man's soul laid bare, and the silence that followed was full, heavy, and alive, charged with the electricity of emotion, the kind that lingers, that hums softly beneath the surface, that promises change, and then, just as the air seemed still, Leo's phone buzzed softly on the table, the sound startling in the quiet, and he glanced at it quickly, his eyes widening as he read the brief message that appeared, and for a heartbeat, Clara saw a flicker of hope, a spark of anticipation in his gaze. Because the words on that screen, though simple, carried the weight of possibilities long denied. "Can we talk?" And the room seemed to shrink and expand at the same time, the rain outside now a gentle patter, the steam from the tea curling like a delicate fog over the table, the dim light catching in the corners of the apartment as Leo stared at the message, fingers trembling slightly, mind racing, heart pounding, and Clara watched him with a mixture of concern, hope, and quiet pride, knowing that the next step he would take, the choice he would make, could change everything, could turn years of longing into possibility. And as he set the cup down with a faint clink, the tension between fear and courage vibrating in the small space, he looked up at Clara, and in that look was a silent question, a plea for guidance, a recognition that sometimes the most important decisions come when the heart speaks louder than reason, and Clara nodded gently, understanding the unspoken words, offering encouragement without pressure, allowing him to feel the full weight of the moment, to own his choice, to step into vulnerability with grace, and the room seemed to hold its breath with them, suspended in the fragile space between fear and hope, uncertainty and potential, and for a few timeless minutes, the world outside ceased to matter, the storm outside paused, and all that existed was Leo, his trembling courage, and the small, steady presence of Clara, who offered the quiet assurance that no matter the outcome, honesty would always be a victory, that speaking the truth, finally, after so long, was its own kind of triumph, a turning point in a life full of emotion, longing, and the beautiful, complicated ache of the human heart. And as Leo finally rose, phone in hand, coat draped loosely over his arm, the first flicker of resolve lighting his face, Clara felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, knowing that the hardest step had already been taken, the words spoken, the heart opened, and now, the story of courage, love, and the fragile dance of vulnerability was ready to move forward, to unfold, and to carry him toward Emily, toward honesty, and toward whatever future awaited them, because some moments, no matter how small, have the power to change everything, and this, she knew, was one of them. The apartment felt unusually quiet after the soft buzz of Leo's phone, the faint drip of rain outside creating a slow, rhythmic backdrop as he stared at the message from Emily, the words simple yet loaded with the kind of weight that could make a heart race, a message that promised conversation, confrontation, perhaps reconciliation, and yet for a moment, he simply sat, frozen by the gravity of the choice. Before him, the familiar warmth of the teacup now cooling in his hands as if time itself had slowed to honor the pause of a life waiting to be reshaped, and Clara watched him closely, noting the subtle tremor in his fingers, the restless shifting of his gaze, the way his shoulders tensed and relaxed repeatedly as if each movement required courage, and she understood in that instant that this was more than a simple text, more than a conversation about a friend or a minor misunderstanding. It was a delicate, fragile crossroad where past feelings, unspoken desires, and the haunting ache of years of longing collided, and Leo drew a deep breath, holding it like a shield against the storm of emotions churning in his chest, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, hope, and something like wonder as he reread the message, each word etched in his mind. A bridge between what had been and what could be, and Clara's heart thumped with quiet anticipation because she had seen him struggle with his feelings for Emily since childhood, seen him retreat when emotions became too raw, and now, finally. The walls he had built around himself seemed to be cracking, and she could sense that the moment of decision was imminent, that the next step would require him to reach into the deepest parts of himself, to summon courage he had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. And she remained patient, letting the silence stretch just long enough for him to find his resolve, knowing that too much pressure could shatter the fragile bravery he had cultivated, and then, almost imperceptibly, he set the cup down. The faint clink resonating in the stillness, and rose, coat draped over his arm, phone clutched loosely in his hand, the flicker of determination in his eyes a stark contrast to the vulnerability that had filled the room just moments before, and Clara felt a surge of both pride and concern, understanding that the choice he made in the next minutes could redefine his heart, could alter relationships and reshape the quiet rhythm of everyday life, because love, when long buried and suddenly unearthed, demanded attention, honesty, and sometimes, risk, and Leo took a slow, steadying breath as he walked toward the door, each step measured, deliberate, the kind that speaks of internal negotiation between hope and fear, longing and hesitation, and Clara followed, offering silent support, a steady presence that could anchor him without intruding, because sometimes courage needs witness, not guidance, and the rain outside had softened, the storm easing as if granting him permission to step into uncertainty, to embrace vulnerability, to face the person who had unknowingly captured his heart, and as he opened the door, the cool night air brushing against his cheeks, he paused for a heartbeat, looking back at Clara, a fleeting, grateful smile touching his lips, a silent acknowledgement of her patience, understanding, and support, before stepping into the night with a tentative confidence, each footstep carrying the weight of anticipation and the fragile hope that honesty might be enough. And Clara closed the door gently behind him, leaning against it for a moment, feeling the echo of emotion still lingering in the air, the quiet energy of change vibrating subtly around her, and she thought of Emily, imagining the potential tension, the possible joy, the vulnerability that awaited both young hearts as they prepared to confront what had long been unspoken, and the thought made her chest ache with a mix of excitement and empathy because she understood too well the rawness of first confessions, the trembling courage, the thrill and terror intertwined when hearts finally dared to speak, and Leo's figure receded into the rain, the night swallowing him in shadows and the glimmer of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, the city itself seeming to pause in recognition of the significance of the moment, and inside the apartment, Clara felt the quiet weight of suspense, the lingering warmth of tea long forgotten, the soft glow of lamps illuminating her reflective face as she imagined the possibilities ahead, wondering how Emily would respond, how Leo would carry himself, and whether the years of longing would culminate in something gentle, something real, something tender and lasting. And as minutes stretched into a soft eternity, she felt the rhythm of the rain outside mirror the rhythm of her own heartbeat, a pulse of anticipation and hope, because life often demands leaps of faith, and hearts rarely heal without risk, and she thought about how emotions, carefully buried, could erupt suddenly when given space, could transform ordinary nights into unforgettable memories, and Clara realized that she was witnessing a transformation, the delicate tipping point where vulnerability met courage, where the fear of rejection faced the courage of honesty, and where the longing of years could finally find its voice. And as she moved to the window, watching Leo's figure become smaller under the amber glow of streetlights, she felt a mixture of awe and worry, knowing that young love, even when nurtured over years, was fragile, easily bruised, yet capable of extraordinary depth, and the city around him seemed indifferent yet perfectly timed, the passing cars, distant voices, and gentle patter of leftover rain forming a quiet symphony, accompanying a journey that was as much internal as external, a dance of emotions invisible to all but the heart, and Clara's mind replayed countless scenarios, Emily's surprise, the tension in her voice, the questions and confessions that would follow, the quiet smiles and hesitant glances, the invisible threads of connection that might stretch between them, pulled taut with desire, curiosity, and affection, and Leo, walking steadily yet with a tentative energy, felt every heartbeat, every memory, every imagined moment of potential joy or pain, the anticipation almost unbearable, the soft ache of unspoken love turning each step into a test of courage, because stepping into honesty after years of hesitation demanded more than words, it demanded trust, vulnerability, and faith in the heart's resilience, and as he approached Emily's familiar door, his hand hovered for a brief second before knocking lightly, not too loud, not too soft, the sound a question, an invitation, a tentative bridge across the gap between longing and reality. And in that brief, charged silence before the door opened, he felt the weight of the past pressing, the warmth of hope mingling with the chill of fear, and in that moment every memory of laughter, every shared secret, every fleeting glance in the past came rushing back, converging into a single, overwhelming clarity. He had to speak, he had to be honest, and nothing would matter more than the truth he carried in his chest, the truth he had nurtured silently for years, hidden under layers of fear and timing, waiting for the courage to finally surface. And as Emily opened the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern, the air between them shimmered with unspoken emotions, the quiet tension thick enough to feel a delicate web of anticipation stretching across the small space, and Leo's throat tightened, words threatening to escape before he could steady them, yet he stood firm, heart pounding, eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability so raw it made Emily instinctively soften, her own curiosity and affection evident in the way she held his gaze, and for a long, suspended moment, neither spoke, the city, the rain, and the night itself seeming to hold its breath in witness, as if granting them permission to unfold the story of hearts long restrained, of emotions finally allowed to surface, of a connection that had endured silence and distance, waiting for courage to catch up with longing. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Leo began, "Emily, I need to tell you something I've carried for years," and her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of anticipation and gentle concern, and the quiet hum of the night wrapped around them like a cocoon, holding them in a fragile, suspended reality where only honesty, vulnerability, and the delicate promise of possibility existed. And Clara, miles away but in spirit present, could almost imagine the careful pacing of emotions, the tender, hesitant unfolding, the way a single sentence could change everything, the way hearts, once restrained, could finally step forward, and Leo's first words, trembling yet determined, opened the floodgate of years, the slow unraveling of tension, the emergence of feelings that had long been hidden yet never forgotten, the dance of human connection, fragile yet enduring. And as the night deepened, the rain faded to a soft drizzle, the streetlights flickered gently, and two young hearts, trembling but brave, began to navigate the delicate, beautiful terrain of honesty, attraction, longing, and emotional reckoning, a terrain as old as time yet always unique, always fragile, always powerful, because the truth, when finally spoken, carries its own momentum, reshaping hearts, changing lives, and offering the quiet, exhilarating promise that even after years of waiting, love can begin anew if courage is allowed to lead the way. And in that suspended moment, Leo realized that the hardest part had been stepping forward, that vulnerability, once embraced, could be freeing, that long-buried emotions could breathe again, and that tonight, under the soft glow of distant streetlights and the fading murmur of rain, a story of longing, tenderness, hope, and the fragile, thrilling weight of first confessions was unfolding, delicate yet profound, ordinary yet unforgettable, a story that would linger, echo, and blossom into something neither of them could have predicted, but both of them would feel forever, a story born of courage, honesty, and the quiet, enduring pull of hearts finally willing to meet. Leo's heart raced as he stood at Emily's doorstep, the words he had rehearsed for years now swirling chaotically in his mind, emotions colliding in a storm of anticipation, fear, and hope. And for a moment, he hesitated, hand hovering above the doorknob, as if the simple act of turning it could unleash a flood of possibilities he had long imagined but never dared to confront, the rain having faded to a gentle mist that left the night cool and fragrant, the street lamps reflecting off wet pavement like scattered diamonds, and he drew a deep, steadying breath, reminding himself that courage is not the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. And with that thought, he turned the knob and stepped inside, greeted immediately by Emily's surprised, gentle gaze, her eyes reflecting curiosity, warmth, and perhaps a hint of the recognition of all the years of hidden emotion he carried silently. And in that instant, the room seemed suspended in a delicate tension, the kind that vibrates invisibly between two hearts ready to speak, ready to hear, ready to embrace what has long been denied. And Leo's voice trembled slightly, but carried the weight of honesty as he said, "Emily, I've kept this inside for so long, and I don't know if it's the right time, but I need you to know how I feel," and the words, once trapped behind walls of fear and hesitation, finally found air, echoing softly in the room, filling every quiet corner with the resonance of longing and sincerity. And Emily's eyes softened as she stepped closer, the subtle tension in her body speaking volumes of emotions mirrored in her heart. Emotions she may not have fully acknowledged until this moment, the years of friendship, the shared laughter, the stolen glances, all coalescing into a quiet recognition that something delicate and profound had always been simmering beneath the surface, and for a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, breaths mingling with the warm, intimate air of the room, the world outside fading to a gentle murmur, allowing this fragile, pivotal moment to exist uninterrupted, and Leo's hand, almost unconsciously, reached toward hers, fingers brushing lightly. Tentative yet searching, as if reaching not only for connection but for courage, for reassurance, for permission to finally allow the emotions he had guarded for years to flow freely, and Emily's hand responded after a moment, fingers intertwining with his, the gesture simple yet loaded with meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the depth of feeling, the trust, the willingness to explore what had long remained unspoken, and in that quiet physical contact, a warmth blossomed between them, a gentle, thrilling energy that seemed to radiate from their hearts outward, filling the room with possibility, intimacy, and hope, and Leo felt a rush of relief, wonder, and exhilaration, as if the act of honesty itself had lifted a weight he had carried for years, and Emily, her own chest rising and falling with the excitement and nervousness of the moment, let out a soft breath, her voice low and tender, I've always felt something too, Leo. I just didn't know how to say it, and I wasn't sure if you felt the same," and the words struck him like sunlight breaking through clouds, washing over him in waves of gratitude, joy, and disbelief. The long silence of unspoken emotions now replaced with a rhythm of shared acknowledgement, the kind of unhurried, intimate cadence that grows from trust, vulnerability, and the delicate courage to let oneself be seen fully. And as they spoke, the conversation flowed naturally, a dance of honesty, curiosity, and mutual recognition, each word, each smile, each quiet laugh, building bridges across years of distance, hesitation, and fear, the emotional walls crumbling gently with every careful confession, and Leo realized that all the waiting, all the private heartaches, all the moments of longing had led to this point, this beautiful, fragile intersection where hope met reality, and the night outside, once a backdrop of uncertainty, now felt like a quiet witness to the quiet miracle unfolding inside the small apartment, the misty air and flickering street lamps adding a soft, cinematic glow to the unfolding scene, and Clara's presence, though distant, lingered in his memory. The quiet encouragement she had offered earlier echoing in his mind, reminding him that courage and honesty are often the keys to unlocking the heart's deepest desires. And as Emily shared her own stories of uncertainty, longing, and the emotions she had hidden behind smiles and casual conversation, Leo listened intently, feeling the connection deepen, the bond strengthening with each revelation, each confession, each tender acknowledgement of shared experience, and he realized that what had felt like years of isolation in his own emotions was dissolving, replaced by a warmth, a sense of belonging, a gentle thrill that comes from being truly seen, truly understood, and finally able to respond. And Emily laughed softly, a sound that carried the magic of relief, joy, and recognition, a sound that made his chest ache in the best possible way, and he smiled, feeling the tension of years melt, replaced by a lightness that made his heart expand, a quiet certainty that honesty had changed everything, and that even if the future was uncertain, this moment was theirs, delicate, perfect, and unforgettable, and they talked for what felt like hours, sharing small stories, dreams, fears, and the subtle threads of affection and admiration that had always connected them, the conversation flowing effortlessly, the room humming with the quiet electricity of intimacy, and Leo felt a surge of gratitude for the chance to finally speak, finally connect, finally step into vulnerability and be met with warmth, acceptance, and the promise of something deeper, more meaningful than either had dared to hope. And as the night deepened, they moved closer naturally, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally touching, the subtle gestures of affection and connection layering over the words, the laughter, and the shared confessions, each moment building upon the last, a delicate crescendo of emotional intimacy, trust, and growing love, and Leo realized that the romantic tension he had felt for years, the longing that had haunted private moments, the ache of missed opportunities, was now transforming into a tender, mutual recognition that neither had been alone in their feelings, that both had carried this quiet flame, nurtured it silently, and now, at last, were ready to explore it together, and Emily's eyes met his, wide, soft, and glimmering with emotion, and she whispered, "I've wanted this too, Leo, for so long. I just didn't know how to start," and his heart leapt, the relief and joy almost overwhelming, the years of restraint, fear, and hesitation washing away in a tide of pure, gentle emotion, and he smiled. Squeezing her hand lightly, his voice steady, calm, yet infused with the excitement of long-awaited connection, "Then let's start now, Emily." Together, and the words, simple yet profound, acted like a key unlocking the final barrier between them, the room now filled with the quiet electricity of possibility, the gentle hum of emotion, and the delicate thrill of two hearts finally, fully aligned, and the night outside seemed to mirror their emotions, the soft drizzle, the reflective glow of streetlights, the faint rustle of wind in trees, all harmonizing with the rhythm of their laughter, shared stories, and quiet smiles, and Leo felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't known in years, a quiet triumph of honesty, courage, and the vulnerability of love expressed freely, and Emily, feeling the same, leaned slightly closer, her presence warm, comforting, and exhilarating, a perfect balance of intimacy and excitement, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to matter, leaving only the small apartment, the gentle hum of shared breaths, and the fragile, thrilling reality that something longed for, hidden, and quietly nurtured had finally been acknowledged and embraced, and they sat together, hands clasped, words flowing, eyes bright with emotion, feeling the thrill of mutual understanding, the tender excitement of beginnings, and the quiet comfort of being truly seen, truly known, and truly valued, and Leo realized that the steps he had taken, from the hesitant knock at Clara's door to this intimate, profound conversation with Emily, had transformed him, had reshaped his heart, had taught him that courage and honesty are more powerful than fear, that longing and love can survive years of silence if given the chance, and that the sweetest, most lasting connections often come not from grand gestures but from small, brave acts of truth, and as the night stretched, the rain completely ceased, leaving a cool, fresh breeze that brushed through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of the city, the soft hum of distant cars, and the whisper of possibility, and in that space, Leo and Emily shared quiet laughter, gentle touches, exchanged confessions and dreams, and felt the fragile thrill of romance unfolding naturally, beautifully, and without force, a romance rooted in understanding, patience, and the careful navigation of hearts long aware of each other's presence, and in the final moments of the evening, as they sat together, closer now, shoulders touching, hands occasionally brushing, hearts beating fast yet steady, the world felt suspended, time slowed, and both realized that love, when nurtured with courage, honesty, and patience, can bloom even after years of silence, can transform ordinary nights into unforgettable memories, and can give two people the rare and exquisite gift of discovering each other fully, deeply, and tenderly. And Leo, smiling at Emily, feeling the warmth of her presence, the soft light in her eyes, and the quiet thrill of shared understanding, whispered, "I'm so glad I finally told you," and Emily, smiling back, her own eyes glimmering with emotion, replied, "And I'm glad you did," and in that simple exchange, the room was filled with a profound sense of completion, a promise of new beginnings, and the quiet, beautiful realization that hearts willing to be brave, honest, and open can find love, connection, and joy even after the longest wait. A story that had begun with hesitation and uncertainty now blossomed into the gentle, radiant warmth of something true, tender, and unforgettable, a story that would linger in memory and emotion for years to come.